Before we get started with the preseason, I wanted to cover one more training camp story, this time from Paul Hornung. Hornung wrote that while curfew at camp was 11 o'clock at night, this was only for single players. Married men got to go home and be with their wives, and Hornung thought this was unfair. So he and Max McGee decided to sneak out of St. Norbert College and a couple of rooms at the Northland Hotel, which they would share with a couple of girls. Around 5 in the morning, McGee got nervous and went back to camp alone, while Hornung stayed behind. When McGee returned to camp, he found out the team knew about their excursion. How specifically Lombardi knew, Hornung wasn't sure, but he remarked his coach had one of the best spy networks in the entire country. So McGee had to awkwardly go back to the hotel to get Hornung. Hornung, however, wasn't apologetic. He had enough of Lombardi and the strict rules, so he was prepared to tell him off and be traded. So later that morning, around 10 o'clock, they saw Lombardi, who was busy watching game film. When Lombardi noticed them, he started screaming, "Hornung, do you want to be a player or a playboy?" Hornung replied, "A playboy." Lombardi answered, "See me at 4 o'clock and I'll decide what I'm going to do with you." After the argument, Hornung wanted to leave camp and proceeded to imagine himself telling his story to Sports Illustrated and making Lombardi trade him to the Chicago Bears. As he started to pack his bags, however, someone distracted him, and when he went back to continue packing, he found his suitcase was gone. Someone had hidden it. It turns out that someone was Jerry Kramer because he thought Hornung was making a mistake and just needed some time to cool down. Well, it worked, and evidently Lombardi cooled down too because he apologized to Hornung for yelling at him in front of other people, but he still had to pay a $500 fine. This would be one of the first of many fines Hornung and McGee would get together. Hornung, looking back, said, "Every year Max and I were fined more than the rest of the team put together. Hell, we could have financed a small Caribbean country with our fines." To put things into context, back in 1958, before Lombardi got there, former head coach McLean had decided to put players on the honor system when it came to curfew. So Hornung and McGee set their own curfew, which was at 4 in the morning. So going from that to Lombardi was a big transition. Now, on to the rest of the video. August 17th, 1959. A crowd of 28,286 came to Milwaukee to see the Packers take on the Bears in the first preseason game under the Lombardi era. The Packers actually got off to a good start and maintained various leads throughout the game, leading by scores of 7-3, 13-3, and 16-13. Bart Starr was noted for his command of the offense as he threw 2 touchdown passes. The first came after Packers defensive back Jesse Whittington intercepted a pass at the Bears 40 and raced all the way to the Green Bay 21. 3 plays later, on the first play of the second quarter, Starr hit Paul Hornung up the middle for a 17-yard touchdown pass. Whittington himself would wind up with 2 interceptions for that game. Bart Starr's second scoring throw came at the end of a 10-play, 62-yard drive where he connected with Knefleck for a 9-yard touchdown. Starr would end up completing 7 out of 13 passes for 67 yards and 1 interception to go along with his 2 touchdown throws. And the running game would end up with 190 yards as the Bears were simply unable to stop their line. Trailing late in the game, Chicago quarterback Zeke Brodkowski had the ball in Packers territory, and on a pass that flew to Green Bay's 20-yard line, Emlyn Tunnell was there to make the play, or at least he tried to, but he wasn't able to hold on to the ball. Earlier in that game, someone had stepped in his hand, leading it to swell, and later x-rays would reveal Tunnell had broken his hand. So instead of a game-ending interception, on the next play the Bears completed a 37-yard touchdown pass to Rick Caceres to pull ahead and give them a 19-16 victory. After the game, Halas praised the Packers, stating that they are a much better club already because they have Vince Lombardi for a coach. Lombardi said, "We played a good game overall. We made a few mistakes, like those 2 15-yard penalties when we were in scoring position, but at least the game showed that we have a scrappy team." Despite the strong showing from Starr, Lombardi said Bay Pirelli would be starting their next preseason game against the 49ers. As far as why Pirelli would start instead of Starr, you have to remember the context of the time. Lombardi was still deciding who his starting quarterback would be and wanted to find out how Pirelli fared, so he would rotate the starting position in the preseason to each quarterback to see what he had. August 18th, Boyd Dowler, who had attended the quarterback class back in June, returned to the Packers on Monday after being absent due to the college All-Star game. And on the topic of receivers, Lombardi got after them in practice due to the drops in their game against Chicago. He stated, "Catching a pass takes just a little effort, and if you want to stay around here, we've got to have effort in every play." In that first match, there were about 3 drops, and one of the attempted completions would have given them a first down, but instead it led to the Packers having to punt. Lombardi said, "3 more would have been just about right, and that's just about how many we dropped." Tennell was noted as wearing a cast, but despite his hand injury, he seemed fine for the next game. August 20th. Despite what was said earlier in the paper, it was announced Tennell would be sitting out against the 49ers. Also in this article, it observed that San Francisco, having been dead last in 1958 and stopping the rush, presented a great opportunity to show off Lombardi's rushing attack. The next few weeks would be critical to the players because these games would help decide who would make the team, as the Packers, per league rules, had to cut the squad down ultimately to 35. August 21st. In case you're wondering if the Packers had chartered private team flights back in 1959, the answer is yes. 47 players left Austin Stropper Field at 11 o'clock in the morning to get on a United Airlines flight to San Francisco. On the previous day, Lombardi had run goal line drills and was pleased with what he saw as the running game was picking up between 3 to 8 yards per rush. While in San Francisco for the game, they would stay at the Palace Hotel before going up to Portland, Oregon, where they played the Eagles on August 29th. August 24th. The Packers got their first preseason win under Lombardi as they edged the 49ers 24-17. Once again, the Packers' rushing attack shone through as they racked up 163 yards. Jim Taylor stood out, getting 60 yards in 13 attempts. Lombardi said, "We still have to work on the offense, but we need plenty of additional work in pass defensive pursuit. But the offensive tackles, plus Paul Hornung, Lou Carpenter, and Jim Taylor, showed we could move the ball." Netflix scored in a short touchdown pass for McCann. Hornung ran 9 yards around the right end for another, and following a 96-yard kickoff return by George Dixon, the Packers were able to score their 3rd touchdown with a 2-yard run by Don McElhaney. Despite this, the 49ers had a chance to tie late in the game when trailing 24-17 when they completed a 40-yard pass from Y.A. Tittle to R.C. Owens on the 1-foot line. However, before San Francisco could run another play, time expired. Hornung had this to say, "Our offense is 80% better this year, and believe me, it's a real pleasure to play behind a line that opens holes. We have a good ball club, a hungry ball club." August 25th. They were now at Portland University in preparation for their game against the Eagles. Lombardi praised the work of the offensive line against the 49ers, although the defensive line had some issues. He elaborated, "We didn't get as good a rush in the passer as I'd like, but Bill Quinlan and Dave Hanner played fine games." It was noted that Tennell would be expected to play against the Eagles. August 28th. And here we see an ad where you could listen to the Packers-Eagles match on radio station WJPG 1440. The game would start at 11 o'clock at night Wisconsin time, which is a bit interesting as one has to wonder why it started so late. Yes, it was a West Coast game, meaning it would have begun there at 9 o'clock p.m., but that still is a bit late. Also on August 28th, it was noted that Boyd Dowler would get his first playing time against the Eagles, and Joe Francis was named the starting quarterback. To commemorate the Packers' 40th anniversary, Dominic Olejniczak on the left celebrated by giving sports editor George Calhoun a box of his favorite cigars. In 1919, Calhoun was the first local sports writer to cover the team. In fact, in that first article, the nickname Packers was so new to him that it was placed in quotation marks. August 31st. The Packers rolled over the Eagles 45-28. Francis was the starting quarterback, and his drives helped lead the way. All the touchdowns, however, would be on the ground, as Lou Carpenter, Howard Ferguson, Paul Hornung, and Jim Taylor compiled a total of 220 yards rushing. At this point, Lombardi still had 4 quarterbacks. Joe Francis, Babe Pirelli, Lamar McCann, and Bart Starr, and he knew he would have to release one of them, but said he didn't know which. Francis hit on 6 of 8 passes for 167 yards. Lombardi revealed, "I was surprised by Francis. I may wait until after the next 3 games to make the decision." Francis connected with Alex Hawkins for 53 yards that set up Horning's run that gave them a 7-0 lead. The Eagles came back to tie the game, and then Philadelphia took a 14-7 lead, which would be their only one of the game. Lou Carpenter then capped off an 80-yard drive with a 2-yard touchdown run, and Horning kicked a 21-yard field goal to make the score 17-14 in favor of the Packers. Then Bob Freeman intercepted a pass, which led to a 4-yard touchdown run by McElhenney, putting Green Bay ahead 24-14. Freeman got another interception, which he returned 30 yards for a touchdown, giving the Packers a 31-14 halftime lead. The Packers then had a 97-yard drive that was capped off with Taylor scoring from the 4 to put them up 38-14. The Eagles fought back, getting 2 touchdowns to narrow it down to 38-28. However, Ferguson scored on a 1-yard run to help put the game away. And Bart Starr also played, however he completed only 2 out of 7 passes. Despite the big win, Lombardi was not happy with how the defense played as it gave up 404 yards passing. The Packers then returned home via another chartered United Airlines flight. September 1st. So Starr, Pirelli, and Francis all had their chances to start a preseason game, so now it was Lamar McCann's turn against the Giants in Bangor, Maine. September 2nd. The paper discussed safety Bobby Dillon deciding to reverse his decision in retirement and rejoin the Packers. The future Hall of Famer would be assisting Tunnell in defense, giving Green Bay one final year. Between the two of them, they had a combined 20 years of pro experience, which would be great news for the upcoming regular season. September 4th. Another radio ad is shown, this time for their upcoming game against the Giants. No mention of this game being available on television, however. September 5th. Tight end Ron Kramer got discharged from the military and would be joining the Packers in Greensboro, North Carolina, the following Wednesday. Also soon to join camp, also released from service, would be Ray Nitschke. Ron Kramer, not to be confused with Jerry Kramer, was the Packers' first draft choice in 1957 and played just 1 year before entering military service, but now he was coming out and Lombardi would be moving him from a flanker to the tight end position. Now remember what I said about earlier Packers preseason games not being available on TV? Well, what about regular season games? It turns out if you lived in Milwaukee, no games played in Green Bay would be shown on television. This is for 2 reasons. 1, back then, the NFL had a TV blackout policy of not broadcasting games too close to the home market in order to protect ticket sales. But Milwaukee and Green Bay are 114 miles away, so this distance should avoid the blackout, right? Well, this is where the second reason comes into play. Lombardi addressed the press. Since the CBS outlet in Milwaukee has changed from WXIX-TV, a UHF station, to WITI-TV, a VHF station, Packer telecasts on the Milwaukee station will carry well north into Packer home territory. Instead of only covering the Milwaukee metropolitan area, they will now reach into the Fox River Valley and Lake Shore area, almost to Green Bay itself. This would represent a serious invasion of the 75-mile limit which National Football League teams have always observed. It would have a considerable effect on a large group of fans who attend games in Green Bay. We would very much like to have our fans in Milwaukee see the Green Bay games, but this is a situation which is beyond our control. As Ray Nitschke was joining camp, he was warned things were not going to be the same as the year before. Nitschke said, "When I caught up with the Packers at Greensboro, North Carolina, the equipment manager gave me a word of advice. Watch yourself, Ray. Don't do anything you're not supposed to be doing. This Lombardi is really tough." Because of Nitschke's time in the military, he had to be in some sort of shape. However, when Lombardi first saw him, he wasn't as fit as he wanted, so Nitschke had to do extra work to catch up physically with the rest of the team. Despite his efforts, Nitschke wouldn't get much playing time during the 1959 season. One of the reasons was that he didn't play much in 1958 either, So when Lombardi reviewed last year's game film, he didn't have much to go on. So the spotlight was instead on other players, and combined that with missing training camp, and it's no wonder Lombardi went with Tom Bettis. Nitschke himself joked that his nickname was the Judge because all he did was sit on the bench. September 8th. So Lombardi faced the Giants, his former team, and they lose 14-0. While the Packers' quarterback problem was noted as being an issue, the defense was observed as something that continued to improve. The only 2 scores of the game, not including extra points, came from Giants running back Alex Webster, who ran in from the 2-yard line both times. So how did quarterback Lamar McCann do? He was 5 out of 14 for 65 yards. Bart Starr evidently sat this one out, which would normally make one wonder how Starr did in practice leading up to this game. However, after it was over, it was announced Starr would be the starter for the very next preseason game, so evidently he wasn't in the doghouse. This was just a case of Lombardi juggling 4 quarterbacks and being indecisive. Lombardi complimented his defense. But we generally were hitting hard, and that's good. Not many clubs gained 136 yards rushing on the Giants, and only a few mistakes kept us from scoring. And speaking of those mistakes, early on McCann took the ball to the Giants' 12, however there was a turnover and downs. Late in the game, with Joe Francis at quarterback, he too had the Packers deep in Giants territory on the 14, but lost the ball on a fumble. After the game, the Packers would go down to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where they would be staying at the Oaks Motel in preparation for their match against the Washington Redskins. September 10th. The improved speed of the Packers team is noted, and this is attributed to Lombardi's strenuous workouts. Nitschke commented, "This is much tougher than last year, but I like it. I'm sure it will help me." Nitschke felt an immediate impact as he had to do an extra lap after practice for slowing down too soon in a 20-yard sprint. And the next game against the Redskins would be nationally televised. September 11th. It was noted by sports writer Art Daly that Lombardi's confidence might have been rubbing off on Bart Starr. During a series of kicking drills where both Jerry Kramer and Paul Hornung consistently nailed kicks from the 35, assistant coach Norm Hecker said, "Hope we get this close. We get a lot of points and field goals." Starr responded, "Don't worry about that. We'll be getting closer than this, and often." Starr would elaborate his thoughts to the press. "I'm aware that I haven't won a game yet, but I'm certainly not superstitious about it." He continued, "I feel like a new quarterback under Coach Lombardi, and I'm actually comfortable in the system. He has a definite way of doing things, and everyone knows exactly what's going to be done in each play. Our offensive line has been a big help for us quarterbacks. We got a little time to work now." In the upcoming Redskins game, he said, "I'm all keyed up over Saturday night's game." September 14th. The Packers beat the Redskins 20-13. Despite this, it wasn't the best game for Starr. He had to deal with 2 dropped passes and 2 fumbles. Joe Francis came in and scored 20 points, giving Green Bay the win. Jerry Kramer remarked that in the game, he had started to get a little cocky, so when the Packers were leading, he decided to mess with Redskins defensive tackle Bob Toneff. Kramer went down low to the ground to make it look like it was going to be a run. So Toneff went down even lower. When the ball was snapped, Kramer dove on top of him and said, "Hey Toneff, I was only fooling. It's a pass." This made him so mad that for the rest of the game, he tried to get extra physical with Kramer, leading Jerry to decide to keep his mouth shut from then on. September 15th. Lombardi finally made up his mind in the quarterback position, letting go of Babe Pirelli. The roster was cut down to 38 players, technically 40 if you include Ron Kramer and Ray Nitschke, who were allowed to be kept as extra players until the final cut. Pirelli had recently turned 30, and his age seemed to have been a big factor. In regard to him, Lombardi said he gave it a great try. Lombardi elaborated, "We're building for the future. This is not a patch job." Bart Starr ruminated. "I had mixed feelings when Lombardi released Babe. Babe was 4 years older, and I was retained primarily because of the differences in our ages. It was obviously not a vote of confidence from Lombardi. More difficult to accept, however, was the fact that I had displaced Pirelli, my boyhood idol." Moving on, also in that article, it was announced defensive tackle Henry Jordan was picked up from the Browns. The team was now staying at the Oakton Manor Resort in Pewaukee. And here we can see Ray Nitschke taking some time off by playing shuffle bowling while Nate Borden on the left and Tom Sadak and Forrest Gregg on the right wait their turns, and we see Joe Francis on the right eating a sandwich in a ridiculous looking photo that really should have been published, but I guess the Green Bay Press-Gazette really wanted a shot of him with that sandwich. September 16th. The Packer roster was now down to 40 players. 25 of these were in the 1958 Green Bay team, 10 came from other teams, and 5 were rookies. Of the 40 men, only 9 had more than 5 years' experience. This group was a little bit younger than last year's squad, but not by much. According to Pro Football Reference, the 1958 Packers had an average overall NFL experience of 3.1 years, while 1959's average was 2.9, so not a huge difference, but with Lombardi's rigorous program, they were now also in better shape, better disciplined, and better prepared. They had to stick with Lombardi's way of doing things or they would be gone. There would be no more complacency. Also on September 16th, it was reported Lombardi's car was stolen. His son, Vincent Jr., had parked the car apparently unlocked when some boys took it for a joyride and drove it into a ditch, blowing out a tire and breaking a headlight. They continued to drive the car with the busted tire until they finally abandoned it near Colburn Park on 9th Street. I saw no evidence, however, that they knew it was Lombardi's car. This appeared to just be happenstance. September 17th. Howie Ferguson retired. On the previous afternoon, he had walked into Lombardi's room at Oakton Manor and said he needed to hang it up. To the press, he cited a series of injuries, but he felt the Packers would be in good hands with Jamie Taylor, who had led the Packers in rushing for 4 of the preseason games. September 18th. It was said Bart Starr might start against the Steelers. Despite the way Francis had played against the Redskins, he wasn't looking that good in practice, while Starr and McCann were. Lombardi said he was re-evaluating just how long it would take for the Packers to become good, as the running game was showing a lot of success and looked to be among the league's best, and the offensive line up to that point hadn't been stopped. For the upcoming game, Lombardi ranked Pittsburgh as having the second best defense in the league, while he ranked the Giants, his former team, as being the best. September 19th. It was noted that quarterback Bobby Lane, the former Detroit Lions star who was now in the Steelers, would present a big challenge for the Packers' defense. It was also said that Len Dawson, who would later become a star with the Kansas City Chiefs, would also see some playing time. By this point in the preseason, out of 12 teams in the league, the Packers were one of only 4 teams to surrender less than 100 points, with Green Bay allowing only 91. The Colts' defense was on top, permitting only 69. September 21st. In their final preseason game, the Packers topped the Steelers 13-10 to finish with a 4-2 record. Lombardi noted the preseason was beyond all my expectations. The first 3 quarters were a defensive battle with almost no scoring, as the Packers only had a 3-0 lead. For their offense, McCann completed 6 out of 10 passes for 141 yards with 1 touchdown pass, which was a 4-yard reception by Horning. Starr was 1 out of 4 for 10 yards. Boyd Dowler punted in this game and had an average of a little more than 41 yards per attempt. He also had a good catch on a ball that sailed behind him. This grab set up Green Bay's only touchdown. As a side note, contrary to what was predicted, Len Dawson of the Steelers saw no action. September 22nd. Per league rules, Lombardi cut the roster down to 36 players. It was noted that teams were not allowed to do any trades after the second regular season game, which was a very different approach compared to modern times. September 23rd. Lamar McCann was announced as his starting quarterback, as he would take the reins for the regular season opener in Green Bay against the Chicago Bears. Due to concerns of Chicago spying on the Packers, it was announced that all practices would be held in private. And Ray Nitschke was seen performing fullback duties, so at this point in his career, he still hadn't completely abandoned that role. For the game against Chicago, he would be Jimmy Taylor's backup. Nitschke remarked, "It'll give me a chance to get in more running working over there. We don't run much as a linebacker." The Packers would finally be leaving Oakton Manor for Green Bay on Thursday night. The Bears were listed as being 6.5-point favorites over Green Bay. September 24th. Sports writer Art Daly told fans to temper their expectations against Chicago. He cited the Bears having a 5-1 preseason record and 33 points a game compared to Green Bay's 4-2 record and scoring average of only 19.6. He then proceeded to list more facts and figures, stating he let the fans come to their own conclusion and how the game would go. Kickoff for the Bears game would be at 1:06 p.m. September 25th. A series of articles showcase the Packers-Bears rivalry, and at the very bottom, you can see a detailed recap of their first ever match in 1921, where the Bears, then known as the Chicago Staleys, beat the Packers 20-0. Seeing a recap that detailed is very interesting, as I had not expected to see an article from that long ago to have this much information. Moving on. Also on September 25th, the paper talked about the wives of the coaching staff by proceeding to list the full addresses of where they lived. Now, it's important to note that back then, you could have publicly looked up this information via phone book, assuming, of course, that by September 25th, there was an updated edition of the phone book that had the new coaches in it. Also, Green Bay was a small town, even smaller than now, as the 1960 census listed them as having a population of 62,952. However, there is no reason to make it easier for a fan to potentially stalk them by conveniently compiling it all into one single piece. So, as much as people like to complain about how the modern internet age has made privacy very difficult, and it has, public sports figures in the late 1950s could be listed in the phone book with the full addresses and phone numbers. Once again, it was a different time. And here we can see some ads wishing the Packers well for their upcoming first regular season game, along with a prediction of them beating the Bears 31-24. Why they thought the game would be so high scoring when the Packers averaged less than 20 points in the preseason, I'm not sure, but there you go. Leading up to the game, it seemed that all the Packers practiced that week was a sweep. The joke was they would run it until Lombardi got tired. Gary Knafleck was battling out with Ron Kramer for who was going to get the right end spot. Kramer had a knee injury, however, which gave an advantage to Knafleck, but he still had to show Lombardi he was worth it. During the final drill leading up to the game, Lombardi was yelling at Knafleck. "Move, Knafleck. Seal it. Seal it." Again. No matter what happened, Lombardi didn't seem to be completely satisfied with him. He had done the sweep over and over and over again, and finally he got so tired he basically lost his fare. He saw Ray Nitschke and then said to Lombardi, "Coach, by this time, I think even Ray knows it's a sweep." Lombardi had to hide a smile. He then yelled, "That's it. Everybody in." The next morning, Lombardi came up to him. "You're starting Sunday." At that moment, all the hard work, all the stress, and all the pain seemed worth it. September 26th, and one final article is shown previewing the game against Chicago. And speaking of Knafleck, the official starting offensive lineup was announced. At left end, Max McGee. Left tackle, Bob Skoronski. Left guard, Fuzzy Thurston. Center, Jim Ringo. Right guard, Jerry Kramer. Right tackle, Forrest Gregg. Right end, Gary Knafleck. Quarterback, Lamar McCann. Left halfback, Paul Hornung. Right halfback, Lou Carpenter. And fullback, Jimmy Taylor. So on the eve of the first regular season game, a good deal of uncertainty lingered. It was one thing to look good during the preseason, but how would the team fare during games that actually counted? Also, despite their good running game, scoring was an issue, as when it came time to actually get touchdowns, they were inconsistent. However, their defense anchored them, and coming out of a disastrous 1958 season, with Lombardi now at the helm, they had nowhere to go but up. That's all for now. When we continue, we'll cover the start of the 1959 season. See you next time.